along came a developer, and it was going to turn into whole area of the meadow was going to vanish under a cement floor that housed buildings and stores and all kinds of wonderfully useful industrial things. So he said, why don't you go and save our meadow?
So, next. We went there with trucks. The museum was rich at that time. You know, sometimes museums are rich. So we went there with trucks and rolled up this meadow and shipped it over to the museum and took it upstairs on their lift next and unrolled it on the roof. Well, we hadn't watered the lawn for about a month or so it died and acted as fertilizer for this. Then things grew so fast, the museum director said, well, go do something out there so we could get a photograph. So Helen and I ran outside. You do what they tell you, you know, up to a point. And what we're doing there is a totally useless photo op. Nobody goes out to the meadow and rips things out. You wait till the seeds drop. You see there's seeds on everything. So much for museums. Next. Well, we produced, what can I say? We put together 4 endangered meadows. Well, that's a wet meadow there. It turns out that a normal meadow ecosystem has about 30, 35 species in it, depending. We had 160 species up there, and it became then the most complex meadow biotope in Europe. And it was studied from the following perspective. Over a 3-year period, would we lose species? Would they migrate to other parts of the meadow? We said we thought not. We said we thought the soil was the determinant. And that turned out to be true. And so on a couple of PhD theses on it, on meadow life, we found that after 3 years, there was 143 species. Now, why talk like this to an art audience? Truth is, when we do a piece, we want a harvest that is art-like. This work was attended by 250,000 people. It touched a nerve. It was opened by Angela Merkel, who's now the head of Germany. She was the head of the environmental department there. And so it has a human thing. And it was a flower field. And it had many, many implications. And one of the harvests from it was a scientific harvest. If that doesn't happen, we'll want a social one. So that we grew up in a world in the 60s in art where simplicity was the name of the game. The work had to be understood, and the work had to be able to be criticized. And it had to function as a nice picture in the newspapers. And so we took a contrarian position. We thought, the hell with Warhol. We didn't need 15 minutes of fame too much, although we wanted it. And so the question was, why not be as complex as the world we lived in? Why did we have to articulate a sort of what we saw as moronic, modernist oversimplification of practically everything to the advantage of all? They thought. From our perspective, was to the disadvantage of all.
Let me go back to the work.
Oh, sorry.
The Endangered Meadows of Europe came into being as a complex extended narrative, a continuously changing living color field that covered the almost 40,000 square feet of the center of the rooftop. The roof space was then transformed into a field upon which a complex drama was enacted. The drama began with the decision to save the 400-year-old meadow by transplanting it to the roof. The decision set the stage, and it was thanks to many ongoing efforts. First, the theoretical ones of Dr. Martin Schneider-Jacobi, of Dr. William Bartlett, and the practical ones of Dr. Wolfgang Schumacher and some of his students, and of Dr. Gotthard Wolff. All of them worked with this, and they gave us pictures of 15 different meadows from the south of Italy right through to Norway. And with each of these slides, which we transformed on tile into images about so big that were tile images, there was a story. And the story of each meadow.
They can't hear you, so.
You can't hear me? What? Okay, so essentially, let's see where I was.
Too close.
Too close, too far.
There.
There it's right, okay. And the reason behind this and the thing that concerned us about the meadows were their disappearance. The extraction of the meadow life from Europe, where we talk about extraction. And what happened was very simple, the same thing is happening in America, where they suddenly decided that it was much more efficient to bring the meadow to the cow, who would then remain stationary in the barn, than let the cow go forth to the meadow.
Now, what this means in ecological terms is formidable, because a vast trans-European meadow mosaic generated a vast trans-European ecosystem. That is to say, the cattle, when they lived on it, the farmers were smart enough to harvest after the seeds dropped. So the meadows regenerated automatically. But while the cattle were off it, deer and fox and various insects and snakes and a whole microsystem grew through Europe. And so by cutting it 6 times a year to maximize yield where cattle were concerned, you wiped the meadow system out of Europe, that ecosystem out of the whole of Europe. This is a tragedy, an invisible tragedy. And we tried to make it visible in this piece. And there were amazing outcomes. One of the thing that Helen was talking about was these images formed a walkway around it. There were 15 of them, and each was a story about a different meadow. And so the 250,000 people who came became, in a way, meadow masters themselves. They got it. And we held that the meadow was a teacher, and it could, in fact, teach us how we should be farming, how we should be growing things. We have to grow things in a way that share with others. And that was done, and that was wiped. So.
And the ecosystem, which was a co-working with man and the environment.
It was an accidental collaboration, actually.
Accidental collaboration, but it was nonetheless a collaboration and continued on. And we have to learn to collaborate with nature in the long run.
So, funny stuff happened. A guard in the museum who was from the Czech Republic showed up with his scythe and said, "This is more interesting to harvest than worrying about visitors." Next. So we made us haystacks. Next. And nurtured the place and collected seed. And next. Well, the head of the Parks of Bonn shows up. He says, "I want a meadow like this." We say, "Go up and roll it up. It's real easy to do." He said, "No, I want your meadow." So our meadow was then transferred to the Parks of Bonn. And that's Helen, the mayor, the head of the parks, and the assistant head of the museum. And next. And every year or so we get Every year or so we get an article from the newspaper.
Next.
And the article says, "The mother meadow has just had a daughter."
Another daughter.
Which means they are collecting the seed and regenerating the meadow life in the city of Bonn, park by park. And it's actually more ecologically provident. You don't have to fertilize. You only cut a couple times a year, and so on and so forth. The idea here was that actually there's no way to win this battle unless we change the way we farm, unless we change the way we